I've got the chaps working on these all over the compound. Oh, those battle dresses, I'm afraid they're a bit too short. I'll have to get the chaps to make those into some sort of working man's outfits.
The Great Escape wasn't just a war movie. It was a battlefield of its own, where Hollywood clashed with history, egos collided with artistic vision, and studio expectations wrestled with the grim reality of the true story it portrayed. What audiences saw on screen: the motorcycle jumps, the claustrophobic tunnel escapes, the shocking executions, barely scratches the surface of what happened when cameras weren't rolling. Actors nearly died during stunts. Directors battled studio execs over historical accuracy, and surviving POWs showed up on set to confront the filmmakers about their lived experiences. Today, we're digging into 15 weird facts about The Great Escape they never wanted you to know. And stick around for our bonus fact: the chilling real-world aftermath that the filmmakers were expressly forbidden from including. Ready to see what really happened behind the barbed wire? Let's break out. Steve McQueen wasn't the first choice for the iconic role of Hiltz. It wasn't Paul Newman. It wasn't Marlon Brando. It was actually James Coburn who was originally considered for the motorcycle-riding American. Director John Sturges had worked with Coburn on The Magnificent Seven and initially envisioned him as the rebellious POW. But McQueen, hungry for a breakout role, aggressively pursued the part, showing up at Sturges' office unannounced and refusing to leave until they discussed the character. What tipped the scales wasn't McQueen's acting prowess, but his motorcycle skills. When producers learned he was an accomplished rider who had competed professionally, they realized they could capture authentic riding sequences without insurance-busting stuntmen. McQueen didn't just want the role, he needed it, telling Sturges, "This character is me. If you don't give me this part, I'll make another movie that puts this one out of business." The famous motorcycle jump never actually happened in real life. The most iconic scene in The Great Escape, McQueen's motorcycle jump over the barbed wire fence, is a complete Hollywood fabrication. Not only did the real-life escapees not use motorcycles, but the scene almost didn't make it into the film at all. Studio executives thought it was too expensive and unnecessary for the plot. Sturges fought back, not for historical accuracy, but because he knew it would be cinematic gold. "Movies aren't about what happened," he reportedly told United Artists executives. "They're about what audiences remember happening." The jump itself became the subject of decades of debate. While McQueen performed many of his own motorcycle stunts, the infamous fence jump was executed by his friend and stunt double Bud Ekins. McQueen had wanted to do it himself, but was forbidden by the studio's insurance company. For years afterward, McQueen allowed the rumor that he'd made the jump himself to persist, only acknowledging the truth in interviews shortly before his death in 1980. Charles Bronson suffered from genuine claustrophobia due to his coal mining past. The tunnel scenes weren't just acting for Charles Bronson, they were psychological torture. As the character Danny the Tunnel King, Bronson had to film in incredibly confined spaces that triggered real panic attacks. What audiences didn't know was that Bronson had worked in the coal mines of Pennsylvania since age 10, where he'd survived a tunnel collapse that killed several of his co-workers. Director Sturges wasn't aware of Bronson's condition until they began shooting the tunnel scenes. Crew members noticed Bronson hyperventilating between takes, his face ashen with genuine fear. Rather than recast or rewrite the role, Sturges made a brutal directorial decision. He used Bronson's real trauma to enhance the performance. "I can't do this," Bronson told him after a particularly difficult scene. "You already are," Sturges responded. "The claustrophobia you see on screen isn't movie magic. It's a man battling his deepest fears with every crawl through those wooden tunnel sets." The production built a fully functional POW camp that locals mistook for the real thing. The set designers didn't just build facades. They constructed an entire working prison camp outside Munich, Germany. The attention to detail was so precise that elderly local residents who had lived through WA twice reported the new prison camp to authorities, believing the Nazis had somehow returned. The production team interviewed former POWs and consulted original German blueprints to ensure accuracy. They installed working electricity, plumbing, and even grew the vegetable garden seen in the film. The barbed wire was real. The guard towers were built to military specifications. The mud was specially imported from a quarry that matched the soil composition of the original camp. What they created wasn't just a movie set, but a historically accurate reconstruction that triggered uncomfortable memories for many Germans working as extras. Several reportedly quit after experiencing disturbing flashbacks while in uniform. One former German soldier, hired as a consultant, walked off the set, telling Sturgis, "You've built it too well. I can't stay here." Donald Pleasence was the only cast member who had actually been a POW during WO2A. In a twist of painful irony, Donald Pleasence, who played forger Colin Blythe, had been a real-life prisoner in the German camp Stalag Luft 1. When Pleasence offered to share his experiences to enhance the film's authenticity, director Sturgis initially welcomed his input, until Pleasence began describing horrors that the studio deemed too disturbing for American audiences. Pleasence's character goes blind in the film, a condition that paralleled his real wartime experience of watching fellow prisoners lose their sight due to malnutrition. During one scene where the prisoners receive Red Cross packages, Pleasence broke down unexpectedly. It wasn't acting. The packages used as props were identical to those he had once desperately waited for as a starving prisoner. "I don't need to pretend," he told co-star James Garner between takes. "I just remember." Pleasence's haunted performance earned him critical acclaim, though he rarely discussed the film in later interviews, finding the memories it evoked too painful to revisit. A near-fatal accident during filming was kept hidden from the public. The production's commitment to realism nearly turned deadly when an accident during the tunnel construction scenes sent 3 crew members to the hospital. The wooden supports in one of the tunnel sets, built to collapse on camera for dramatic effect, gave way prematurely during a rehearsal. 2 camera operators and a lighting technician were trapped under hundreds of pounds of dirt and wooden beams for nearly 7 minutes before being extracted. One cameraman suffered a crushed vertebra and never worked in film again. United Artists executives immediately moved to suppress the story, fearing negative publicity. Insurance investigators later discovered that the construction team had used weakened wood intentionally to ensure a more dramatic collapse on camera. The production was shut down for 3 days while safety protocols were reviewed, but the scene that caused the accident remains in the final cut. Director Sturgis later admitted, "We crossed a line between creating danger and actually putting people in it. That was unforgivable." The film's most heartbreaking scene was almost cut by nervous studio executives. The execution of 50 recaptured prisoners, based on the real murder of 50 Allied officers by the Gestapo, sparked heated debates between the filmmakers and United Artists. Studio executives argued that showing the systematic murder of prisoners violated the unspoken Hollywood rule that war films should focus on heroism, not war crimes. Sturgis refused to compromise, threatening to quit if the scene was removed. "This isn't just a movie," he told studio head Arthur Krim. "This is a memorial to those men. Cutting their deaths is erasing them twice." The compromise that was reached is what appears in the final film. The executions happen just off-screen, with only the sounds of gunfire indicating what's occurring. What few people know is that Sturgis actually shot explicit execution scenes, with actors falling into prepared graves. This footage existed until the mid-1970s, when it was reportedly destroyed during a studio archive purge. James Garner later claimed it was the most disturbing footage I've ever seen in my life. Steve McQueen's infamous Cooler King ball-throwing scenes were a result of real-life tension on set. The scenes of McQueen's character bouncing a baseball against the cooler walls weren't originally in the script. They were added after McQueen had a heated argument with director John Sturgis about his character's screen time. Feeling his role wasn't substantial enough compared to the ensemble cast, McQueen refused to report to set for 3 days. When he finally returned, he was still seething with resentment and remained uncooperative. Sturgis, instead of punishing the difficult actor, handed him a baseball and said, "Show me what it feels like to be stuck in this production." McQueen improvised the entire sequence, channeling his genuine frustration into what became one of cinema's most iconic portrayals of controlled isolation. The bouncing rhythm, which McQueen worked out himself, was specifically designed to be annoying to both the German guards in the film and to the director behind the camera. The baseball itself sold at auction in 2018 for $22,500. The film's most accurate tunnel sequence caused genuine panic attacks among the crew. The claustrophobic tunnel scenes weren't just difficult for Charles Bronson. They created a crisis for the entire production. To film the authentic-looking escape sequences, cinematographer Daniel Fapp designed a specialized periscope camera that could move through the narrow tunnel sets. The problem? Someone had to operate it from inside. 4 camera operators quit the production after experiencing panic attacks in the confined space. The tunnels were only 24 inches wide, actually wider than the real tunnels had been. Temperatures inside reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit under the lights, and oxygen was so limited that safety officers had to monitor air quality between takes. One operator became so disoriented after 4 hours in the tunnel that he began hallucinating and had to be sedated before he could be extracted. Director Sturgis, determined to get the shots, eventually offered double pay to anyone willing to operate the camera in the tunnels. The footage they captured remains some of the most anxiety-inducing confinement scenes in film history. James Garner performed the most dangerous non-motorcycle stunt himself after stuntmen refused. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because we're about to reveal how one of Hollywood's most charming leading men almost died on set when a stunt went catastrophically wrong. The scene where Garner's character Hendley and Donald Pleasance's Blythe steal a small plane required the aircraft to crash land in a field. 3 professional stuntmen declined to perform the sequence after seeing the planned trajectory. Garner, who had learned to fly while serving in the Korean War, impulsively volunteered. "I can put it down right where you want it," he told Sturgis. What he didn't know was that the vintage German plane had been modified for the scene with weaker landing gear, designed to collapse on impact. Nobody informed Garner of this enhancement. When the landing gear buckled, the plane slammed nose first into the ground at nearly 45 meters. Garner suffered 3 broken ribs and a severe concussion, but completed the scene in a single take. The production doctor later revealed that Garner was 30 seconds from bleeding out from an internal puncture before receiving medical attention. The actor never spoke publicly about the incident, considering it just part of the job. German authorities tried to shut down production multiple times for glorifying Allied propaganda. Filming in Bavaria in the early 1960s meant dealing with German officials still sensitive about World War II depictions. Local Bavarian authorities attempted to revoke filming permits on 3 separate occasions, claiming the production was creating anti-German sentiment in the region. What complicated matters was the production's decision to hire former German military personnel as technical advisors to ensure accuracy in the portrayal of Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe procedures. Several of these consultants had served in actual prison camp administrations, creating uncomfortable situations when they encountered Donald Pleasance, who had been a real POW. The situation reached a breaking point when local police briefly detained 2 trucks of authentic-looking German uniforms and weapons heading to the set, suspecting they might be part of a neo-Nazi gathering. Director John Sturgis had to appeal directly to the German Federal Film Commission in Berlin, arguing that the film portrayed specific Nazis as villains, but showed others, particularly the camp commandant, as professional soldiers who respected the Geneva Convention. This nuanced approach ultimately allowed filming to continue. Richard Attenborough's character was drastically toned down from the real Big X. Roger Bushell, the real-life mastermind of the escape portrayed by Richard Attenborough as squadron leader Roger Bartlett, was far more complex and controversial than the film suggests. Producers deliberately softened his character after learning disturbing details about his activities in the camp. The real Bushell, while undeniably brilliant, employed brutal tactics against fellow prisoners suspected of being security risks. According to surviving POWs, he authorized beatings of prisoners he deemed security threats and allegedly planned the murder of suspected informants, though no killings were carried out. Attenborough, who had researched Bushell extensively, argued for a more morally ambiguous portrayal. "War makes monsters of principled men," he told Sturgis. "That's the real tragedy we should be showing." The director disagreed, believing audiences needed a heroic figure to center the story. Attenborough later said the watering down of Bushell's character was his greatest regret about the film, as it sanitized the psychological toll of captivity. The iconic theme music was almost replaced just weeks before the premiere. The Great Escape's unforgettable march, now one of the most recognizable pieces of film music ever composed, was nearly scrapped at the last minute. Composer Elmer Bernstein had created the jaunty, optimistic theme to represent the irrepressible spirit of the prisoners, but studio executives found it inappropriately cheerful for a war film where dozens of characters die. United Artists demanded a more somber, traditional war score. They brought in another composer, rumored to be Alex North, to create an alternative soundtrack just 6 weeks before the premiere. The replacement score was actually recorded with a full orchestra at considerable expense. Director John Sturges held firm, threatening to remove his name from the film if Bernstein's original music was replaced. At a crucial test screening, audiences responded so positively to the original theme that the studio relented. The alternative score has never been released, though film historians believe portions were later repurposed for the Sand Pebbles. Bernstein's theme went on to become so culturally significant that it's been used at sporting events, particularly in England, for decades. A real Nazi officer visited the set and pointed out a critical design flaw that could have ruined the film. In a bizarre twist of fate, an elderly man approached the security perimeter during filming and identified himself as a former Luftwaffe officer who had served at the real Stalag Luft III. Rather than remove him, Sturgis invited him to tour the set, hoping to gain additional insights for authenticity. The ex-officer walked the grounds silently until reaching the tunnel entrance hidden under a stove in one of the barracks. There, he began laughing. Through a translator, he explained that the production had made the stove too small. The real one had been significantly larger to accommodate the wider tunnel entrance. If left unchanged, this detail would have made all the tunnel escape scenes implausible, as the actors wouldn't have physically fit through the opening, as constructed. The production halted for 2 days, while the set was modified. The former officer refused payment for his consultation, but accepted a bottle of scotch. His name was never recorded in production notes, with Sturgis simply referring to him as our unexpected technical advisor in later interviews. The actual tunnel used in the real escape was discovered intact in 2011. One of the film's historical inaccuracies was portraying Tom as the successful tunnel, when in reality, it was Harry that the prisoners used for the actual escape. This change was made because Harry didn't translate well for international audiences, who might confuse the tunnel name with a character. In an extraordinary archaeological discovery, the real tunnel Harry was located in 2011 by a team of British and Polish excavators working at the site of Stalag Luft III. Using ground-penetrating radar and original camp documents, they located the tunnel entrance and found it remarkably preserved, with portions of the wooden support still intact. What astonished researchers was how accurately the film had portrayed the engineering despite having no access to the real tunnels. The dimensions, shoring techniques, and even the lamp system powered by stolen batteries were nearly identical to what production designers had created, based solely on survivors' descriptions. An original spoon used for digging and a fragment of a prisoner's uniform were recovered and are now displayed in the Imperial War Museum in London. The darkest reality behind The Great Escape never made it to screen. When production began in 1962, Several of the German officers responsible for carrying out the execution of the 50 recaptured prisoners were not only still alive, but had reintegrated into German society. 3 of them, living under assumed names, learned of the production and made anonymous contact with United Artists through intermediaries. Their message was simple but chilling. Portray the executions as wartime necessities rather than war crimes, or face potential legal action for defamation. The studio, recognizing the impossible ethical position this created, brought the matter to director Sturgis and screenwriter James Clavell. Clavell, a former POW himself, who had survived Japanese camps, was incensed. "They're trying to rewrite history again," he reportedly told Sturgis. The production proceeded with the execution scene as planned, portraying it unambiguously as murder. Several months after the film's release, German authorities, partly motivated by the film's depiction, reopened investigations into the executions. By 1968, 14 surviving participants in the killings had been identified and prosecuted for war crimes, a legal consequence directly triggered by a Hollywood film. The Great Escape wasn't just a thrilling prison break movie. It was a historical reckoning that changed how we remember World War II, transformed Steve McQueen from actor to icon, and even brought some measure of delayed justice to the real heroes it portrayed. If you found these revelations about The Great Escape surprising, hit subscribe for more hidden Hollywood histories. Because the greatest stories aren't always the ones that made it to the screen. They're the ones that happened when the cameras stopped rolling.